My name is Greg. For the second or third time, I want to welcome everyone here. I'm pumped up that you're here, and we're going to dive right into my message today, which is titled, Do You See What I See? Now, you ever notice that you can sometimes look at something and see it so often that you actually miss what's been there the entire time? Now, there's a ton of logos that we see all of the time that actually have this truth in it. So first of all, I want you to look at this logo. This is the FedEx logo. Does anyone notice something in this logo that's been there the entire time, but maybe you've missed it? There's an arrow. Somebody's like, I don't see no arrow. There is an arrow. It's been there the entire time in between the E and the X. This logo is celebrated as one of the top 8 logos ever made because of what's not there. All right, next logo here. Wendy's. Who likes Wendy's? No one. Good, because it's disgusting. But anyways, notice on the collar it says Mom. You see that written right there? How many of you guys didn't know Mom was there? Now you know it. Every time you look at it, it's the only thing you'll see. All right, let's go to the LG logo. Anyone have any LG appliances? This is one of those things that has not been confirmed nor denied by LG, but it's actually a Pac-Man logo. So if you were to turn it, move the little L up, and obviously you have the I already there. Pac-Man, I love Pac-Man. He's such a friendly guy. Woohoo! One other person likes Pac-Man. All right, next, Toblerone. Don't know if you like this chocolate bar or not. It's a Swiss chocolate, if you're very sophisticated and you're not into Hershey's, okay? Anyone see something that's in the mountain? There's a bear in the mountain. And I, once again, did not notice that the bear was there. So this week, as I was looking at those logos, I noticed as I was looking at these and doing some research on this message that there's simply more than meets the eyes. Now, you could look at these things thousands of times, and if somebody never told you that it was there, you could miss what was actually hidden. Does anyone remember those magic eye posters? They used to have a store at the mall like years ago, before you would get stabbed at the mall. Let's put the magic eye poster up. Okay, now, I have truthfully never been able to see what is in these things, ever. I still don't have any idea what's in that. As a matter of fact, I can't see what's in them so much that I had to have Tyler proof it for me because I just didn't know if it would be naughty or not. So I was like, if I'm going to put this up in front of the church, I need someone to proof this and make sure it's clean. So I'm pretty sure this is appropriate, and if it's not, blame Tyler. And what's frustrating is I know that there's something behind that image. I know that there's something there. I just can't see it. I just can't see it. You can go ahead and take that down. So let me ask you a question about yourself today as we shift gears. When you look in the mirror at yourself, what do you see? Now, this is rhetorical. You don't have to yell back at me. Somebody's like, I see a handsome devil is what I see, right? You don't have to yell back. It's rhetorical. Keep it to yourself. But maybe you see like an accountant or an engineer or a mom or a dad or a spouse, right? Maybe you see a student or someone who's really good looking, like I said, whatever. But I want you to think about when you look in the mirror, what do you see if you go one layer deeper? Beyond what you see on the outside, beyond the surface of who you are, what do you actually see? Because I think the truth is for many of us, when we look into the mirror and we look and we get this image back and we look deeper into our souls, some of us don't like what we see in the mirror. Maybe we're reminded of a past or a story that we don't like about ourselves. Maybe we're reminded of a sin that keeps rearing its ugly face. Maybe there's a circumstance that we see that we would wish would just go away. Maybe when we look in the mirror, all we can do is see that somebody said or did something to us. Maybe sometimes when we look in the mirror, all we see is what we keep failing at. And so for you, when you look in the mirror, and this is probably not every day, it's not like every day you wake up and look in the mirror and like, today I'm a coward. But there are days when what you see, you don't like what you see. It might be loser, could be failure, could be reject, unlovable, ugly, stupid. So today, I want to talk to those in the room who sometimes look in the mirror and they feel incompetent or unworthy or condemned or inferior or maybe insecure. I want to talk to those who wish maybe that they were a little smarter, a little bit more talented, maybe a little bit more successful. I want to talk to those who wish they were a little taller, were a baller, those who wish they had a girl they looked good they would call her, who wish they had a rabbit in a hat with a bat and a 6'4" Impala. Some of you are like, what the heck? Skee-Lo, everybody. It's a one-hit wonder. Go Google it. You're going to go Google it later. The song's called I Wish. Anyways, here's what you need to understand about these feelings that we have of insecurity when we look into a mirror, is that insecurity is not a mirror problem. It's a lens problem. Insecurity is not a mirror problem, but a lens problem. You see, the problem that you see is not what you see in the mirror, but maybe how you see yourself in the mirror. Because what if there's something else in you, or something else about you that's more than meets the eye? What if there's something in you that you can't see in yourself, but maybe it's been there the whole time? What if there's more to your story than just the input or the receptor that you're getting right now in that moment? And maybe the reason you can't see it isn't because of what you're looking at, but how you're looking at it. Because maybe you have a broken lens by which you're viewing yourself. On April 24th, 1990, NASA launched the Hubble Space Telescope into space. Now, for those of you who are not science geeks, let me give you a few fun facts on the Hubble Space Telescope. This thing is just spinning right now around the Earth at 17,000 miles per hour. It goes 5 miles every second, about 350 miles above the Earth, so that it orbits the Earth every 95 minutes. This thing, by the time you watch like a Disney movie, this thing is going right back around the Earth, okay? Every 95 minutes. It cost $1.5 billion to build this telescope, which is roughly the size of a school bus. And the scientists who built it thought, you know what, it's going to be worth it. We got to build this thing. We got to send it out into space because it's going to take the most amazing pictures, and when it gets up there past the atmosphere and it takes these most amazing pictures, everyone's just going to be blown away, and it's going to be like, I'm so glad that Hubble is up there. And so when they first got the first photos back from the Hubble after they launched it into space, this was the image that came back. Wah, wah. Now, you probably can't see this very well, but it's very blurry, it's pixelated, it's not a very good picture. They were terrified and mortified when these images came back. Now, let me put this into some context. The equivalency of the Hubble seeing the universe like this is like you going to the eye doctor, and when you look at the eye chart, the very top letter is usually like an E. And even if you're blind, you can see the E, right? You know it's an E. This equivalency would be going to the eye doctor and looking at the top letter, and even the top letter itself being blurry. Hubble had one job, to take good pictures. Didn't matter how fast you flew, didn't matter how pretty you looked, didn't matter how big you were. You got one job, Hubble, and you're screwing it up. You can't even take a good picture. So what went wrong? Because this was at the verge of being a catastrophic, a $1.5 billion embarrassment. And so as the scientists put their heads together and tried to figure out what happened and what went wrong, they realized, and I'm not an engineer, so I can't explain it to you in the full context, but that there was a piece of the mirror in the lens of Hubble's lens that was off by 2 microns. Okay, 2 microns, 1/50th of a piece of paper that was causing it to be off. So what do? How do you fix this thing? Right? It's not like you can bring it back home. You just spent millions, billions of dollars to put it into space. They couldn't just adjust it with an app, okay? There wasn't an iPhone app for it back then. So somebody theoretically had this brilliant idea that, okay, we've got this problem in the lens. What if we invert the problem in a new lens and attach it to the old lens, and theoretically, it would kind of counteract itself, it would balance itself out, and it would fix the problem. And that's essentially what they did. They made a brand new lens, a contact lens, to put on the Hubble Space Telescope, which ironically now there is a contact lens company called Hubble where you can go and buy contact lenses. Now, how they caught this thing, I don't know. These guys are amazing. They fly up to space. What kind of catcher's mitt do you need to catch this thing? But they caught it. They went up there a few years later. They put the contact lens on the Hubble. And now let's look at the before and after. Once they put the brand new lens on, this is the galaxy before, this is the galaxy afterwards. Now look at some of the stunning pictures we get from the Hubble telescope. I don't even know what that is, but it's amazing. Let's look at the next one. Awesome, right? Next one. Blow your mind, it's a star exploding. And then this, I don't even know what this is, but just stunning. Now, sidebar, this isn't even in my notes. I don't know how you can look at stuff like this that's just out in the universe, dancing around, and think, there can't be a God. That whole idea of God's crazy. This is just happening out there with an artist God who painted this picture so that in 1990, when they sent a telescope up there, one day we would be able to see his glory in the heavens and the earth, which is just amazing. But I want you to put up the blurry picture one more time. When Hubble was getting the pictures like this and seeing the universe through this lens, it wasn't the universe's fault. The universe was still shining in all of its glory, glorifying God. When Hubble was interpreting the universe like this was Hubble's fault because Hubble had a faulty lens. Stephen Covey, the leadership guru, says, we see the world not as it is, but as we are, or as we are conditioned to see it. So I wonder in our own lives, when you look through the mirror through the lens of your own two eyes, when things are going bad or maybe not so well in our life, what's your go-to lens to view the world? What's your lens that you view the pain in your life through? What's the lens that you view your suffering through? What's the lens that you view your failures through? Do you see the obstacles, or do you see them as opportunities? Do you see things only through a lens of despair, or does your lens bring you hope? Because the reality is you will never see opportunity and you will never see hope if your lens is always broken. If you're interpreting the world through a mirror, through a lens problem, it's not a mirror problem, it's a lens problem. You'll see the logo, but you'll miss the arrow. You'll see the universe, but it'll always be blurry. And in some ways, we've been conditioned to see the world and our situations this way. So what if we reconditioned ourselves? What if we could add a cosmic contact lens over our vision of who we are and adjust the way we see the world, adjust the way we see ourselves, adjust the way we see and interact with the people around us? What if there was a cosmic fix? Because maybe we need to start looking at the world through God's eyes and not our own. Now, there's a story in the Bible that I think is going to help us understand what I'm talking about here. It's one of my favorite stories, and we don't have time to walk through his whole story. But if you're interested and you want to go back, your homework, you can go and look at Gideon's story. It's in Judges 6 and 7, and there's a lot there in the book of Judges, which is in the Old Testament front half of the Bible, like about 20% through. Okay? So let me give you a little background on Gideon before we dive into this narrative. Israel, which is who Gideon was, he was an Israelite. Israel was under what was called Midianite rule. The Midianites were a very cruel people. These were a wicked people. This was a harsh people. They had taken over the nation of Israel and they had made them slaves and they had plundered and robbed everything from the nation of Israel. Okay, so the nation of Israel is in complete bondage to these people as we find the narrative in Judges chapter 6. And so because they're in complete bondage and misery, they cry out to God. They're like, God, listen, I know we've kind of been on and off again. I know we've been dating and we've broken up a few times, but God, listen, we got to get back on the right track. So if you could help us out here and maybe get rid of these evil people, and we can move on and we can worship you and everybody will be happy, and everyone said amen, boom, we'll go. Okay? So they called to God and God says, okay, I can't watch my people go through this anymore. I got to do something. So he raises up a judge, which is a fancy Old Testament word for a deliverer, and his name was Gideon. Now, what Gideon didn't know is that God had his GPS address. What Gideon didn't know is that God was coming to him and that God had predetermined that Gideon was the one that he wanted to deliver the nation of Israel. And so we're going to jump into the story here in Judges chapter 6, verse 11, when God sends an angel to Gideon and he calls him to do his work. So verse 11. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the tree, under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash. I can't ever say these names, so you should feel better. If you can't pronounce Bible names, then join the club, okay? I think it's Abiezrite, but I'm not sure, okay? So we'll just say Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was, threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Verse 13, "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my Lord." Gideon's very polite. "But how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." So it's here in this story, in this narrative, that Gideon has an encounter, not just with the living God, an angel of the Lord, but also with an encounter of his own view or lens of himself. Because God is coming to Gideon, he's asking him to be a deliverer. And this is a tall order, no doubt. Because everybody is afraid of the Midianites, especially Gideon. We know that Gideon is afraid of the Midianites, and he does not see himself as a deliverer based upon where we see Gideon threshing wheat. Now, some of you are like, whoa, rewind. What are you talking about here? Well, a little context. When you would thresh wheat, you would actually go to an elevated place. And you would thresh the wheat so that the wind would come and help blow away the chaff off of the wheat. The wind would assist and make the problem much easier. And so when you would do this, it basically would mean that you had a pile of wheat and nothing else. But if you look at this narrative, it actually says that Gideon is in a wine press. Well, what's a wine press, you say? Well, a wine press is a hole in the ground. Gideon is hiding out in this not ideal spot to thresh wheat because he's afraid that if the Midianites see him on a hillside threshing wheat, they will come and steal his crop. So he puts himself into a pit, into a wine press to hide. So it's pretty clear from this story that Gideon doesn't see himself as a deliverer. He's just trying to mind his own business. He's just trying to stay out of harm's way. He's not looking to make trouble. He's just trying to have a little wheat. He wants a little bread. He wants to make a sandwich, all right? That's all he's trying to do. He's not trying to pick a war or pick a fight because these people are bad. And I love that the angel just comes, and in verse 12, look at what the angel says when he appears to Gideon again. He says, when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Now wait a minute here for a second. Mighty warrior? This guy is not a mighty warrior. He's hiding in a hole in the ground because he's afraid. There's nothing about this guy that would tell us he's a mighty warrior. There's nothing from history or the context of this story that would tell us he had the skills to fight back. We don't know that he went to MMA school. We don't know if he went to Bruce Lee school. There's nothing about this guy that tells us he's a fighter. All we know is that he's hiding in a pit in the ground. So nothing that we know would affirm this statement. A more accurate description probably at this time would be mighty coward or mighty wimp or scaredy cat. But yet God comes and he calls him this perfect contradiction, like two opposites. This would be like me calling Tyler cool. It just wouldn't work, right? Case in point, we're in the office the other day and Tyler strolls in wearing Crocs with black socks. I say, "Tyler, have you just given up? Because who wears Crocs with black socks?" And he said, "No, they're back." I was like, "Who told you that?" That is not true. They're not back. Now, if you're gardening or like in your basement cleaning out a flood, sure, wear your Crocs. But out on the streets with normal people, come on, man, have some self-respect, Tyler. Anyways, I love him. I know. Poor Tyler. Somebody said love hurts. It does hurt if you're Tyler. Anyways, so Gideon probably thought when God came to him, he's like, "God, you probably got the wrong address. You must have wanted to go to a different wine press down the street because I'm here minding my own business." But here's what's cool, is the angel calls Gideon mighty warrior because that's how God sees Gideon. God sees Gideon as a mighty warrior because God calls it like he sees it. Anyone ever hang out with somebody who says, "I just call it like I see it"? And usually those people are jerks, right? Right? I just call it like I see it. You're a jerk. It's cool. When somebody says I call it like I see it, it just means, hey, I'm just, whatever comes in through my lens, I'm just going to tell you what I see. And so in this same instance, as God looks at Gideon, he's just saying, "Gideon, I'm just going to call it like I see it." And when we think God can't use us, or when we think God's got the wrong address, and when we think God looks at us and we're thinking, "God, you must be crazy because you don't know who I am. You don't know how I feel. You don't know how afraid I am." What God sees when he looks at us is our potential and who he made us to be, because God calls it like he sees it. And I wonder if you look at Gideon, if Gideon can't see what God sees, because Gideon could only see himself in the context of his circumstances. He's been conditioned to live life a certain way. I mean, think about it. He's in a hole in the ground. His whole life, or however long the Midianites have been in rule, I think at this point, if I'm remembering right, it was like 7 years. So a long time, whatever. All he's known is fear and hiding from this people. He's been conditioned to live this way. He's in a hole. He's in a pit. Thus, his only perspective is pitiful. It's all he can see is his circumstances. And the truth is, whenever you view life or yourself through the lens of your circumstances, it'll always give you a distorted image because it's momentary. Our circumstances are temporary. But the information that they're giving us isn't final, it isn't ultimate, but yet sometimes we put so much stock into those moments that we think it is. And God's saying, no, I can see past your circumstances. Because I'm God. I created all those things that the Hubble Space Telescope has seen. There's probably more wonders that we can't see. God sees the bigger picture because he's got that Google Maps view, right? He can zoom out. When we're living in the living room, he can see our house, our neighborhood, our city, our nation. He can zoom out. He's got it all under control. And God's opinion, when he looks at us, is not affected by our situation or our past. Because God knows who you are and what he's asked you to do. You see, God saw Gideon as a warrior, not because of what Gideon's done, but because of what Gideon was capable of. You see, God saw Gideon as a warrior because even though Gideon could see a problem, God could see the big picture and knew that there was a solution. God saw Gideon as a warrior because he can see what's there even when we can't. God sees the arrow when we just see the logo. Because God knows what he put inside of all of us. So if there's a difference between how we see ourselves and how God sees us, then who's right? Probably the one who created us, right? But one of the surefire signs for all of us that maybe we have a lens problem, that we're viewing the world through the wrong lens and seeing things maybe in the way that we shouldn't, is when we start making excuses for why we're stuck in the pit that we're in. If you look at this narrative again, we see that Gideon is actually almost arguing or debating with God as to why he can't do what God's asking him to do. He's making excuses and telling God, God, you must be crazy. So once again, we're going to put this passage up. It says, pardon me, my Lord. Gideon's being polite as he's about to tell God that God's crazy. Pardon me, my Lord, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us? But how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. This is just a package of excuses right here. He starts with but, he goes to if, he goes to why, he goes to where, he ends with but, he makes a but sandwich, he's blaming his circumstances, he's blaming his family heritage, he's blaming the history of the nation of Israel, he's got doubts. All he's doing is making excuses. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Making excuses is one of the simplest and most common ways that we derail God's plan for our lives. When we start to come up with the ifs and the buts and the where were yous, God, and we start making all these excuses, and God's saying, listen, I know who you are. I made you. I see a mighty warrior. Well, I don't know, God, because when I look at myself, I'm not very smart, and maybe I'm too old or I'm too young. Or you don't know what I did, and you don't know my past, and you don't know how hard I've worked, and this is too hard, and God, I just don't have time for that. And my family, if you knew my family and where I came from, God, my past, all these things. But when God comes to you and asks you to do something, do you think God needs to check your resume? As if he doesn't know who you are? As if he doesn't know your story and who you've been created to be? You think God doesn't know your past? God knows you because he made you and he's with you every second of the way. So if God comes to you and says you can do it, then why debate it? Why do we so quickly default to excuses when God is saying, come on, I got so much better for you? Well, but, if. What are we so afraid of? But yet we all find ourselves there. I'm guilty as charged. Guilty as charged. I remember when last year, beginning of 2016, when I was getting ready to maybe start Stateline Church, or the church. At that time, I didn't know the name of the church. I'll tell you what, I'm not going to be, I won't lie to you, I was terrified of starting a church. I had all these reasons as to why I shouldn't do it. God, but if it doesn't go well, and if no one shows up, and what if no one likes me as a communicator, and what if this happens, and but that, and I had all these excuses. I was terrified. And I remember talking to my wife, and if you don't know my wife, I'll brag on her for a second. My wife's a saint, okay? She's one of the most encouraging people in the world and wise, and she's just awesome. And she's like, I'll just do it. You'll be fine. She's like, you'll be great. It's what you meant to do. And I remember, so one, I've got the wind in my sails of my wife behind me, and then I remember talking to a friend. And as I've told the story of why we've started Stateline, this phrase has come up a lot. As one of my friends, I told, hey, I really think maybe God's asking me to start this church. I don't know why. Not sure, what it's going to look like and all this stuff. And he said, well, I've known that for a long time. What took you so long? And I sat there and I thought about that. And he could see it even if I couldn't. And he could see it in me even if I didn't see it in myself. And he could see past my fears and my insecurities and all of the what-if scenarios and the excuses that I could make to not do this. And I remember I just prayed. I said, okay, God, if this is what you want to do, you got to give me the courage to push past my fears and do what it is that you're asking me to do. And I love this. I've heard this quote or this saying before. I don't know where it originated from, but courage is just fear that said its prayers. Courage is just fear that said its prayers. We're all afraid sometimes to do the things that God asks us to do. We're all bogged down with our insecurities, our inabilities. We all wish sometimes we were a little bit more successful or a little bit more talented or a little smarter or had a little bit more ability behind our name. But God says that he will be with you. And I love this. God simply tells Gideon two things. One, he says, go in the strength that you have. And two, I will be with you. You got all these excuses, Gideon. You got all these reasons you can't do what I'm asking you to do. Well, just go in the strength you have. And don't forget something. The kicker is, I will be with you. Because what God is saying to Gideon is, my presence, coupled with who you are, is enough to do what I'm asking you to do, whatever that is. Whether it's at your workplace, whether it's in your personal life, whether it's in a relationship, my presence, coupled with who you are and who I created you to be, is enough to do what I asked you to do. Because God's vision of who you are is more powerful than your own. And God's presence in your life is more powerful than any excuse you could ever make as to why you're not doing what you know you should be doing. The strength is there. The courage that you think you don't have is actually in you because God is with you and made you to do the things that he's asked you to do. So you don't have to wonder, well, is God going to be with me? Yeah, he promised, I'll be with you. I'll never leave you. I'll never abandon you. I'll never forsake you. Do I have what it takes? Yeah, you have what it takes. Why? Because Christ is with you. You can go in the strength that you have, which also means you don't have to wait for some special calling or an angel to show up at your bedside, all right, to give you some magic sword that's going to help you do whatever it is that you think you need to do. The power that you need, the courage that you need, the strength that you need, whatever that is, to push past your doubts, to push past your insecurities, to push past your fears, and to shine the light that God has called you to shine is already in you because of Jesus. Let's look at this verse in Ephesians 1. This is Paul talking to the church in Ephesus. He says, I pray that the eyes of your heart be enlightened. I pray that the eyes, that you would see through the lens of God, that the eyes of your heart would be enlightened, that you would see through God's eyes, in order that you may know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people. We're going to get rich, yo. When we get to heaven, there's riches, a glorious inheritance for all of us, and his incomparably great power for us who believe. That power is the same as the mighty strength he exerted when he raised Christ from the dead. In Romans, it tells us that the same Spirit that rose Jesus from the dead lives in us. What this verse is promising us is that the power, resurrection power, is in you. The eyes of your heart just need to see it. You got riches in heaven waiting for you. You've got the glory of the power of our Heavenly Father if you would just change your lens. And know that it's been there the entire time, whether you realize it or not. You just might not be able to see it because you are a mighty warrior. And you have great power inside of you. And you can go in the strength that you have. And here's what's crazy, is if you fast forward the story, and like I said, we don't have time to go through all of it, but if you fast forward the story, Gideon actually leads 300, not 3,000, not 30,000, 300 men. He had this big army, and God made him keep paring it down to prove that God would be with him. So he takes 300 men up against 135,000 plus Midianites. It's a crazy story. What types of weapons they have? They got nuke bombs? Nope. Here's what they bring to the battle. You ready for this? Horns, jars, and horns, jars, and torches. Guy, you want me to do what? 130? I got 300? These guys are like ninja warriors, right? They're not playing around. No. Oh, they're not. They're just regular Joes. Okay, cool. You got machine guns for me? No. You got a torch? Okay, I'll take a torch. Yeah, it'll be great. We'll do it. It's cool. We'll all die. It's awesome. Way to go, God. And if you look at the rest of the story, they smash these jars and they blow these horns, and these Midianites turn against each other because they don't know what's happening. God confuses them, and they have this huge, mighty victory. And you can go back and read the story. And what's crazy is this isn't like a year later. This is like a week later. So in 1 week time, Gideon goes from a coward in a hole to a warrior on a hill. He has the confidence that God is with him. He has this crazy scenario which God paints for him, and yet he goes. And that is the power of what God sees versus what we see, because God knew that that's exactly what would happen if Gideon would just trust him. The reality is, when God asks us to do something, we've got to remember not what we're doing or where we're going, but who is with us. Because you got the biggest friend in the playground, and you can stand up to any bully because God is with you. And here's why I love stories like this in the Bible. And this is just a cool story, but I love stories like this because if we just heard about the victory and we just heard about Gideon conquering the Midianites and we think that's cool, he just conquered the Midianites. But because we hear about the pit, because we hear about his doubts and his fears, his insecurities, we can actually relate to this story. Because if all we heard was about Gideon's greatness, we would just say, we have nothing in common with that. But because we know he was insecure and unsure of himself, we can understand. Because we know his circumstances weren't good, we can all relate, right? Because we know that he could break free of his broken view of himself, then we can have hope that we can break free of our broken view. Because we know that he felt weak, we can have confidence in God's strength. Because we're all capable of doing something great or something more than we thought we could when we view ourselves through the lens of our Heavenly Father and embrace the story and the power that God's already put in us to do whatever it is. And for every person in this room, it could be something different. It could be something personal, it could be something professional, it could be something spiritual, it could be something relational. I have no idea. But to do the thing that God has asked us to do. Because God is looking at you and saying, no, you're not seeing it right. And if there's a difference between how I see it and you see it, I'm going to tell you a little something. I'm not wrong, you are. Because I see a mighty warrior. I see someone who can do what they're being asked. I read this article in the magazine called Outside Magazine. Don't know if anyone reads this magazine. I came across this article and just really inspired me. And it's about a guy named Kevin Connolly. I'll show you a picture of him. Kevin Connolly has no legs. He was born that way. He's won multiple X Games medals. He's an avid athlete and photographer. I love that picture. He's barreling down a mountainside on a skateboard. No helmet. He don't care. He ain't scared. All right? And there are two things that really stood out to me in this article that I was reading. First thing was about his dad. His dad said in the article that when Kevin was young, he wouldn't carry him across parking lots. He would make him scoot across on his bottom because his dad knew that he had the strength to get across that parking lot and that he would be with him as he went across. Second thing that stood out to me in that story was about his training partner. He had a training partner as he was practicing for the X Games. It was a mono ski was the X Games thing that he was competing in where you sit on one ski. And his training partner that was training with him said, I have never seen Kevin as disabled. I just see him as short. Which means he gets better shots of the snow on fresh powder days. And as I thought about that story, I just thought about us for a second. Our Father in heaven doesn't need to pick us up when he knows we have the strength to do what he's called us to do, especially if he's going to be with us every step of the way. And our Heavenly Father does not see our uniqueness as limitations, but as opportunities to make a huge impact in the world around us. Because God sees opportunity in you, regardless of what you think your limitations are that you see in yourself. But if you don't view yourself through the right lens, you'll miss it. You say, okay, Greg, well, what's the best lens to view myself? Well, how do I truly get a vision of how God sees me? Well, it's simple, actually. It's in God's Word. Oh, here we go. The pastor's saying, read your Bible. Yeah, I'm going to say read your Bible, and here's why. So often we default to the Scriptures as a book to tell us how to behave. And the reality is we should go to the Scriptures as a book to tell us who we are. Because in the book, in the Bible, you know how God sees you and what God has done for you. And there's things in there written about us that say we're a masterpiece and a child of God, and we are ambassadors for Christ, and that we are a new creation in him, and that we are loved, that we are forgiven, we are accepted, we are holy, we are blameless. These are the promises of the Scriptures about who you are, so that when you're facing something, an obstacle, yourself, a demon in the mirror that you don't think you can overcome, you can come back to the truth of who God said you are and look through the lens of who God said you are and know that you can do anything when God's got your back. Because God doesn't mess up, God doesn't make mistakes, God crafted you, and God makes beautiful things when he makes us in his glory and in his image. Psalms 139, very famous psalm. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I'm awake, I am still with you. You see, God made you, and he made you very well. God did a very good job. God never makes mistakes. He doesn't mess up, and he sees who you are regardless of your excuses, regardless of your past, and regardless of your circumstances. And you may say, well, I see myself as worthless. God says, no, 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 no. I see you as worthwhile. You may say, well, I see myself as weak. God says, no, I see you as strong. You may say, well, I see myself as a failure. God says, no, I see that you have a future. You may say, well, I see myself as a sinner. God says, nope, sent my son to take care of that. I see you as blameless because of what Jesus did on the cross. See yourself maybe as ugly or lame, no good. And God says, no, I see you as beautiful, precious creation, new creation, masterpiece, my prized creation, in which I am well pleased, in which I sent my son to die for. You are mine. So here God asks you, next time you look in the mirror, whenever you're starting to run yourself through the lens of what you see, I want you to hear this little question go through your mind. I want you to envision God saying to you, do you see what I see? Do you see what I see? Because what I see is a mighty warrior, created to do good works. And I only make beautiful things. And so when we commit and surrender our lives to Jesus, that's the promise of who we are.